Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez sat in the far corner of the mess hall, her fingers drumming softly against the edge of the metal table. It wasn't a nervous habit. It was something else entirely. Anyone watching closely would notice the rhythm, the precision, the way each finger moved independently like she was playing an invisible piano. But nobody was watching. Nobody ever really noticed her. She was small, maybe 5'4" on a good day, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her uniform hung on her frame in a way that made her look even smaller than she actually was. At 32 years old, she had the kind of face that people forgot 5 minutes after meeting her. Plain, some would say, unremarkable, and that was exactly how she liked it. The mess hall buzzed with the usual lunchtime chaos. Trays clattering, voices overlapping, the occasional burst of laughter from groups of personnel who'd been stationed together long enough to form tight bonds. Maya had been at this base for exactly 3 weeks, and she knew maybe 5 people by name. She preferred it that way. Quiet, anonymous, under the radar. On the table in front of her sat a worn folder containing sheet music. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, third movement. She'd been practicing it for weeks, trying to get the fast passages just right. Her fingers itched to play it, to feel the keys under her hands, to lose herself in the music the way she used to before everything changed. The base was hosting some kind of community event that evening. A piano recital, of all things. When Maya first saw the sign-up sheet posted in the administrative building, she'd walked past it 3 times before finally adding her name. It had been almost a year since she'd performed in front of anyone. A year since she'd done a lot of things, actually. She turned a page of the sheet music, studying the notations she'd made in pencil. Dynamics, tempo changes, reminders to herself about sections that always gave her trouble. Piano had been her escape since she was 6 years old, growing up in a cramped apartment in Miami where the walls were thin and privacy was a luxury. Her abuela had saved up for 2 years to buy her that first keyboard, a cheap electronic thing with sticky keys that didn't sound anything like a real piano, but it was hers, and she'd loved it more than anything. The military had given her a different kind of escape. Structure, purpose, a way to channel everything she felt into something useful. She'd enlisted at 18, starry-eyed and determined to prove something to herself. By 24, she'd made it through the most brutal training the Navy could throw at her. By 25, she was doing things she could never talk about with anyone who didn't have the same level of clearance. 8 years. 8 years of missions that didn't officially exist, of weeks spent in places that looked nothing like the recruitment posters, of learning that she was capable of things she'd never imagined. The small, quiet girl who played piano had also learned how to survive in conditions that would break most people. She'd learned how to make impossible decisions in split seconds. She'd learned that size and appearance meant absolutely nothing when it came to getting a job done. But then came the mission that ended it all. She didn't let herself think about the details too often. The explosion, the months of physical therapy, the doctors telling her she'd been lucky. Lucky? As if losing the career she'd built, the team she'd trusted with her life, the only identity she'd truly claimed as her own, was somehow good fortune. So now she was here, transferred to a training coordination role, which was a polite way of saying they'd put her behind a desk. She reviewed training protocols, updated manuals, attended meetings about logistics and scheduling. Important work, they told her. Valuable contributions. She tried to believe them. The piano was supposed to help. That's what the therapist said. Reconnect with something that brought her joy before the military. Find a new sense of purpose. Process the transition. Maya wasn't sure about all that psychological stuff, but she did know that when she played, the noise in her head got quieter. The memories got less sharp. For a little while, she could just be someone playing music instead of someone trying to figure out who she was now. She checked her watch. Still 20 minutes left on her lunch break. The recital was at 6, which gave her the whole afternoon to practice. She'd managed to reserve the chapel for a few hours, the only place on base with a decent piano that wasn't constantly in use. Maya took a sip of her coffee, now lukewarm. The mess hall had gotten even more crowded, if that was possible. She recognized a few faces from various meetings, but nobody she'd actually spoken to beyond basic pleasantries. That was fine. She'd learned a long time ago that being underestimated had its advantages. People talked freely around those they didn't consider important. They made assumptions that could be useful. They never saw you coming. The entrance doors banged open and a group of new recruits walked in. Well, walked was generous. They swaggered in like they owned the place, all puffed up confidence and testosterone. Maya had seen 1,000 versions of these guys, fresh out of basic training, convinced they were already warriors, strutting around with an arrogance that only came from never having actually been tested. There were 5 of them, all young, probably early 20s, the kind of guys who'd been stars of their high school football teams, who'd enlisted partly for the benefits and partly because they thought it would make them look tough. They moved as a pack, loud and taking up space, their voices carrying across the crowded room. Maya didn't pay them much attention. She dealt with guys like this her entire career. They were all the same at first, all swagger and bravado. Some of them learned. Some of them grew up. Some of them stayed exactly like this until reality knocked them down a few pegs. She turned another page of her sheet music, her fingers automatically moving through the passage on the table. The third movement of Moonlight Sonata was technically demanding, all those rapid arpeggios and thundering bass notes. It required precision, strength, and an ability to maintain control even when everything was moving at maximum speed, kind of like a lot of things in her life when she thought about it. The recruits had gotten their food and were scanning the room for a place to sit. The mess hall was packed enough that finding an empty table would be tough. Maya kept her eyes on her music, hoping they'd find somewhere far away from her quiet corner. She wasn't in the mood for their kind of energy today. But of course they noticed her. How could they not? A woman sitting alone, small and unassuming, lost in some papers. Easy target for guys who needed to prove something to each other. Maya felt them looking before she saw them start moving in her direction. She'd been here before. Different people, different places, but the same basic situation. She could already predict how this would go. They'd make some comments, try to show off for each other, probably say something they thought was funny but was really just disrespectful. She'd have to decide whether to engage or ignore them. Whether to correct them now or let them learn their lesson some other way. Maya's fingers stopped drumming. She took a slow breath, the kind she'd learned during countless high-stress situations. The kind that kept your heart rate steady and your mind clear. She'd give them a chance. Maybe they'd surprise her. Maybe they'd show a basic level of respect and just walk past. But as they got closer, as she heard their voices getting louder and saw the way they were looking at her, she knew better. Some lessons had to be learned the hard way, and something told her that in the next few minutes these 5 recruits were about to get an education they hadn't signed up for. The leader of the group reached her table first. He was tall, probably 6'2", with the kind of build that came from hours in the gym. Blonde hair buzzed short, a square jaw, and eyes that held too much confidence for someone who'd barely started his military career. His name tag read Thompson, and he had that look about him. The look of someone who'd always been the biggest, strongest guy in the room and never had to question it. "Hey there," Thompson said, his voice loud enough that people at nearby tables glanced over. "You lost, sweetheart? This is the mess hall, not the library." His 4 buddies spread out around her table, blocking her in. They probably didn't even realize they were doing it. Guys like this operated on instinct, on pack mentality. They felt braver in groups, stronger together. Classic mistake. Maya looked up slowly, her face completely calm. She met Thompson's eyes without any fear, without any of the reaction he was clearly expecting. "I'm aware of where I am," she said quietly. "Just having lunch." One of the others, a stocky guy with red hair and freckles, leaned over to look at her sheet music. "What's this? You gonna play us a song? Maybe some lullabies?" His friends laughed, that particular kind of laughter that came from trying to impress each other rather than from anything actually funny. "I'm performing in the recital tonight," Maya said, her voice still controlled. "If you'd like to attend, it's open to everyone." Thompson leaned against her table, making himself comfortable. "A recital? That's cute, real cute. I bet you play nice and pretty, don't you?" There was something mean in his smile, something that suggested he was just getting started. "But see, I'm trying to figure out what someone like you is doing on a military base. You sure you're in the right place?" Maya set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. She could feel her training kicking in, the way her mind automatically assessed threats and calculated responses. 5 targets, all young and overconfident. Thompson was the alpha, which meant taking him down first would probably be enough to stop the others. But she really didn't want it to come to that. "I work here," she said simply. "Same as you." "Work here doing what?" asked another one. This guy taller and thinner than the others with dark eyes that kept darting around like he was nervous. Filing papers? Answering phones? Something like that, Maya replied. Let them think what they wanted. Their assumptions weren't her problem. Thompson reached out and flipped through her sheet music, leaving greasy fingerprints on pages she'd carefully maintained for years. Beethoven, huh? Fancy. You know what I think? I think you wandered onto the wrong base. This is for real military, not for playing piano and looking pretty. Something shifted in Maya's chest. She'd dealt with this kind of thing her entire career. The assumptions, the disrespect, the constant need to prove herself to people who'd already decided she didn't belong. Usually she could brush it off. Usually she could be the bigger person. But today, after everything she'd been through, after all she'd lost, she found she didn't have the patience for it. You should probably step back, she said quietly. It wasn't a threat. It was information. A warning from someone trying to help them avoid making a mistake. Thompson laughed. Or what? You gonna tell on us? Get us in trouble. He looked back at his friends, playing to his audience. Man, I thought military women were supposed to be tough. This one looks like a breeze would knock her over. The red-haired guy decided to get in on the action. He reached over and grabbed her folder of sheet music, holding it up over his head like a prize. Maybe we should see what kind of cute little songs she's planning to play. Hey, does anyone know Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star? That was when Maya stood up. The movement was smooth, controlled, not rushed. She was aware of everyone at the nearby tables watching now. She was aware of Thompson's hand starting to move toward her shoulder, probably planning to push her back down or guide her somewhere. She was aware of exactly where each of the 5 recruits was standing, their body language, their balance, their vulnerabilities. Last chance, she said, looking directly at Thompson. Walk away. He laughed again, but this time there was something else in it. Some small part of him, the part that had survived this long on instinct, was starting to realize something was off. But his pride was too big, his need to look tough in front of his friends too strong. Or what, little girl? What exactly are you going to do? Maya didn't answer with words. When Thompson's hand touched her shoulder, she moved. Her training took over. Muscle memory from thousands of hours of practice. She grabbed his wrist, twisted it at precisely the right angle while simultaneously stepping into his space and using his own momentum against him. 2 seconds later, Thompson's face was pressed against the table, his arm locked behind him in a compliance hold that hurt enough to make him gasp, but wouldn't cause any real damage. The mess hall went completely silent. The kind of silence that felt heavy, that made everyone freeze. The thin, nervous guy was the first to react, lunging at her from the side. Bad choice. Maya released Thompson and pivoted, using the attacker's momentum to send him stumbling past her. She helped him along with a perfectly placed strike to a pressure point that made his legs buckle. He went down hard, landing on his back, the wind knocked out of him. The red-haired guy still had her sheet music. He dropped it, his hands coming up in a defensive posture. At least he had enough sense to recognize danger when he saw it. The other 2 recruits had backed up, their faces showing confusion and the first hints of real fear. Thompson pushed himself up from the table, his face red with humiliation and anger. You're gonna regret that, he started to say, moving toward her again. Stand down. The voice cut through the tension like a knife. Everyone in the mess hall turned toward the sound. A woman in officer's uniform was striding toward them, her face a mixture of anger and something else. Recognition, maybe. Or was it amusement? Commander Patricia Hayes had the kind of presence that made people automatically straighten their postures. She was in her 50s, with silver threading through her dark hair and eyes that had seen pretty much everything the Navy could throw at a person. She'd been in service for over 30 years, working her way up through ranks that hadn't always been welcoming to women. Thompson, Commander Hayes said, her voice deadly calm. Rodriguez, Miller, Chen, Anderson. Do you 5 have any idea who you just tried to intimidate? The recruits stood at attention, or at least their version of it. Thompson's face had gone from red to pale. Ma'am, she attacked. Quiet. The commander didn't raise her voice, but the word carried absolute authority. She turned to Maya, and there was definitely amusement in her eyes now. Lieutenant Rodriguez, are you all right? Yes, ma'am, Maya said, bending down to collect her scattered sheet music. Just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, Commander Hayes repeated, turning back to the 5 recruits. Let me clear up this misunderstanding for you boys. This is Lieutenant Maya Rodriguez. She spent 8 years in SEAL operations. 8 years doing things that would give you nightmares. She's earned 2 Purple Hearts and a Silver Star. She's operated in conditions that would break most people in the first 5 minutes. She has more combat experience than everyone in this room combined. The silence in the mess hall somehow got even deeper. Maya could feel dozens of eyes on her, could hear the whispered conversation starting to ripple outward. This was exactly what she'd been trying to avoid. The attention, the questions, the looks. Thompson's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She's a SEAL. Was, Maya corrected quietly, gathering the last of her papers. I'm in training coordination now. Due to injuries sustained in the line of duty, Commander Hayes added. Injuries earned saving 3 teammates during an operation that officially never happened. She fixed Thompson with a look that could have melted steel. And you 5 thought you'd have a little fun at her expense. Show off how tough you are. Bully someone you assumed couldn't fight back. The red-haired guy looked like he might throw up. The thin, nervous one was still on the floor, now sitting up but not trying to stand. The other 2 were staring at their boots, their faces burning with shame. Maya finished collecting her music and straightened up. Commander, with respect, I'd prefer not to make this a bigger deal than it needs to be. That's generous of you, Lieutenant, Commander Hayes said. More generous than they deserve. She turned back to the recruits. You 5, come with me. Now, we're going to have a long conversation with your commanding officer about respect, about judgment, and about what happens when you assault a superior officer. Thompson's eyes went wide. Assault? We didn't. You put your hands on a superior officer without permission, Commander Hayes said coldly. Multiple witnesses. That's assault. You're lucky Lieutenant Rodriguez is more forgiving than I would be. As the commander started marching the 5 recruits toward the exit, Thompson looked back at Maya. The arrogance was completely gone now, replaced with shock and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Ma'am, We didn't know. Maya met his eyes. That's the point, she said quietly.
You didn't know.
Didn't ask. Just assumed. Maybe think about that next time. The mess hall stayed quiet until the group left, then exploded into conversation. Everyone was talking at once, the story already being retold and embellished. Maya sat back down at her table, trying to ignore the stares, the pointing, the sudden attention that made her skin crawl. Her coffee was cold now. Her lunch break was basically over, and tonight's recital had just gotten a lot more complicated. Everyone on this base was going to know who she was now, what she'd been. The quiet anonymity she'd been hiding behind was gone. Maya looked down at her sheet music, at the familiar notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Maybe that was okay. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. The afternoon dragged in a way that made every minute feel like an hour. Maya tried to focus on her work, sitting at her desk in the training coordination office, staring at computer screens filled with schedules and protocols. But every time someone walked past her cubicle, she could feel them looking. Every time voices dropped to whispers in the hallway, she knew what they were talking about. Word traveled fast on a military base. By 2 o'clock, probably half the installation had heard some version of the mess hall incident. By 3, the story had morphed into something bigger than what actually happened. She'd heard one version where she'd taken down all 5 recruits simultaneously, another where she'd been attacked with weapons. The truth was boring compared to what people wanted to believe. Her phone buzzed. A text from Commander Hayes. Check your email. Trust me on this. Maya pulled up her email and found a message from the commander sent to her and the 5 recruits. The subject line read, Community Service Assignment. She read through it quickly. The recruits were being assigned to help with the evening's recital. Setup, breakdown, ushering, whatever was needed. And they were required to attend the entire performance. A follow-up text from Commander Hayes appeared. I none. How you wanted to let it go. But these boys need to learn, and this seems better than the brig. Plus, you'll have free labor. Maya couldn't help a small smile. The commander had always been clever about turning mistakes into teaching moments. She typed back a quick thank you and tried to get back to work. At 4 o'clock, she gave up pretending to be productive. She packed up her things and headed to the chapel to practice. The base chapel was a simple building, non-denominational, with wooden pews and large windows that let in the afternoon light. And in the corner, somewhat out of place among the religious trappings, sat a beautiful black Steinway grand piano. The piano had been donated by a wealthy family whose son had served at the base years ago. It was kept in perfect condition, tuned regularly, treated like the treasure it was. Maya had fallen in love with it the first time she'd played it 3 weeks ago. It responded to the lightest touch, sang under her fingers in a way that cheap pianos never could. She was halfway through her third run of the Moonlight Sonata when she heard the chapel door open. She stopped playing and turned to see the thin, nervous recruit from the mess hall standing in the doorway, holding a clipboard. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said quickly, his voice shaking slightly. "I'm supposed to check the setup for tonight. I didn't know anyone would be here." Maya studied him for a moment. Up close, without his friends around, he looked younger, maybe 19, barely old enough to enlist. His name tag said Chen. "It's fine," she said. "Come in. What needs to be checked?" Chen moved into the chapel like he was walking on eggshells. Just the chairs, making sure there's enough seating. And the sound system." He paused, then added in a rush, "Ma'am, I'm really sorry about earlier. What we did was wrong. All of it. You're right. It was wrong." Maya didn't see any point in sugarcoating it. "Why'd you do it?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He stood there fidgeting with his clipboard. "I don't know. Thompson started it, and we just followed along." "That's not an excuse," he added quickly. "I know that. I made my own choice. At least you understand that much?" Maya turned back to the piano. "You play?" "No, ma'am. I wish I did. My mom plays. She tried to teach me when I was little, but I didn't have the patience for it." "Patience is something you learn," Maya said. She placed her hands back on the keys. "You can keep working. I'll keep practicing. Try not to make too much noise with the chairs." Chen nodded and got to work, moving quietly around the chapel. Maya went back to her music, but she was aware of him listening as he worked. The third movement of Moonlight Sonata was technically demanding, full of rushing passages that required both speed and precision. Her fingers flew across the keys, the music filling the space with controlled urgency. When she finished, Chen had stopped working entirely. "That was incredible, ma'am," he said, then looked embarrassed that he'd spoken. "Thank you." Maya flexed her fingers, feeling the familiar ache that came from intense practice. "You know what the hardest part about playing this piece is?" Chen shook his head. "It's not the speed. It's not even the technical difficulty. It's maintaining control while everything is moving so fast. You have to stay completely calm, completely focused even when your hands are moving faster than your brain can consciously process. The second you tense up, the second you panic, everything falls apart." She could see him thinking about that, making connections. "Like training," he said slowly. "Like a lot of things." Maya stood up from the piano bench. "How old are you, Chen?" 19, ma'am. Turned 19 2 months ago." "And you joined because?" He shifted uncomfortably. "My dad was Navy, retired after 25 years. I grew up around it. Felt like what I was supposed to do." Maya nodded. She'd heard that story 1,000 times. Military families raised military kids, and the cycle continued. "Let me tell you something, and I want you to really hear it. Being good at this job isn't about being the biggest or the strongest or the loudest. It's about judgment. About knowing when to act and when to wait. About respecting people even when you don't understand them." "Yes, ma'am." "You 5 came into that mess hall today and made assumptions based on nothing. You saw someone small and assumed weak. You saw someone quiet and assumed powerless. You saw someone alone and thought they'd be an easy target." Maya's voice stayed calm, but there was steel in it. In a real combat situation, that kind of thinking gets people killed. Chen's face had gone pale. "I understand, ma'am. I hope you do." Maya gathered her sheet music. Because out there in the real world, the most dangerous threats are usually the ones you don't see coming, the ones you underestimate, the ones you dismiss because they don't look like what you think danger should look like. The chapel door opened again, and Thompson walked in with the other 3 recruits. They all stopped when they saw Maya, their faces showing varying degrees of discomfort and shame. "Ma'am," Thompson said, standing at attention. "We're here to finish setting up for the recital." Maya looked at the 4 of them. Thompson, who'd led the charge. The red-haired one, Anderson, who'd grabbed her music. Miller and Rodriguez, the 2 who'd hung back but hadn't tried to stop it. 5 young men who'd learned a hard lesson today. "At ease," she said. "Chen's already started. The rest of you can help him finish. I'll be in the back room if you need anything." She started to walk past them, but Thompson stepped forward slightly. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" Maya stopped. "Go ahead. Why didn't you just tell us?" Before it escalated. You could have just said who you were and we would have backed off immediately. It was a fair question even if it revealed how much he still didn't understand. Why should I have to? Maya asked. Why should anyone have to prove their credentials before being treated with basic respect? You should have backed off because bullying people is wrong, not because you might get in trouble for picking the wrong target. Thompson looked down. You're right, ma'am. I'm sorry. Sorry is a start, Maya said. But what matters is what you do next time. Whether you learn from this or just become better at identifying who you can safely pick on. She left them there and headed to the small room behind the chapel where performers could prepare. She had 2 hours before the recital started. 2 hours to center herself, to remember why she'd signed up for this in the first place. The room had a mirror, a few chairs, and a small table. Maya sat down and closed her eyes, doing the breathing exercises that had gotten her through countless high-stress situations. In through the nose for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out through the mouth for 4. Hold for 4. Repeat. When she opened her eyes, she felt calmer. She looked at herself in the mirror. The same face she'd seen for 32 years, nothing special, nothing remarkable. But now when she looked, she tried to see what Commander Hayes saw. What her old team had seen. What maybe she needed to start seeing herself. Not the injuries. Not what she'd lost. But what remained. The skills. The experience. The strength that didn't show on the outside but ran deep. She heard voices from the chapel. The recruits working together. Their voices quiet and respectful now. The sound of chairs being arranged. The testing of the sound system. All the mundane tasks that went into making an event happen. Maya pulled out her phone and scrolled through old photos. There was one from 4 years ago. Her entire team after a successful mission. They were all exhausted, filthy, and grinning like idiots. She was in the middle, dwarfed by the men around her, but you could see in that photo how much they respected her, how she belonged. 3 of those men had been at her bedside during recovery. 2 of them still texted her regularly, checking in, making sure she was okay. The team didn't forget their own, even when circumstances changed. A soft knock on the door. Ma'am? It was Anderson, the red-haired recruit. Someone from the recital committee is here. Says they need to talk to all the performers. Thank you, Anderson. Maya stood, smoothed her uniform, and walked back out into the chapel. The next hour passed in a blur of last-minute preparations. The recital coordinator, a cheerful civilian woman named Mrs. Patterson, ran through the program with all the performers. There were 7 acts total. 2 piano solos, a violin piece, a vocal performance, a duet, a guitar solo, and a group number from the bass chorus. Maya was scheduled 4th, right after the violin piece. Mrs. Patterson explained the cues, the timing, how they'd transition between acts. It was all very organized, very professional. By 5:30, people started arriving. Military families, base personnel, community members from the nearby town. The chapel filled with the sound of conversation and laughter. Maya watched from the small back room as the recruits helped people find seats, handed out programs, directed traffic. They were polite, helpful, completely different from the arrogant group that had cornered her at lunch. Thompson caught her eye at one point and gave a small nod. Not friendly exactly, but acknowledgement. Understanding, maybe. It was something. At 5:45, Commander Hayes arrived with a man in civilian clothes who carried himself with unmistakable military bearing. Maya recognized him immediately. Captain William Torres, the base commander. He was in his late 50s, with gray hair and a weathered face that spoke of decades of service. His presence meant this had gotten more official than she'd hoped. Lieutenant Rodriguez, Captain Torres said, approaching he. Are in the back room. Do you have a moment? Of course, sir. Maya stood, trying not to let her nervousness show. Walk with me. He gestured toward the side door that led to a small garden area beside the chapel. Commander Hayes followed them out. The evening air was cool, a relief after the warmth of the crowded chapel. Captain Torres waited until they were away from the building before speaking. I heard about the incident in the mess hall. Yes, sir. Commander Hayes handled it appropriately. She did. He paused, looking out at the garden. But what concerns me is that it happened at all. Those 5 recruits have been here for 3 weeks. In that time, not one of their instructors, not one of their supervising officers thought to tell them who you are. Maya hadn't thought about it that way. With respect, sir, I prefer to keep a low profile. I understand that, and I respect it. Captain Torres turned to face her directly. But there's a difference between keeping a low profile and becoming invisible. You're a decorated officer with an exemplary service record. The work you did, the sacrifices you made, they matter. And pretending they don't serves no one. Commander Hayes spoke up. What the captain is trying to say, though less directly than I would, is that you've been hiding. And while I understand why, it's not healthy. For you or for the people on this base who could learn from your experience. Maya felt something tighten in her chest. I'm not the person I was before. I can't do the things I used to do. I'm not sure what I have to offer anyone. That's where you're wrong, Captain Torres said firmly. You have experience, perspective, the ability to teach people not just how to fight but how to think. Those 5 recruits today learned more in 30 seconds with you than they've learned in 3 weeks of standard training. They learned not to mess with people, Maya said with a slight smile. They learned about judgment, about assumptions, about respect. Commander Hayes crossed her arms. And judging by Chen's report of your conversation in the chapel, they also learned about control under pressure and the importance of staying calm in chaos. That's valuable teaching. Captain Torres nodded. I didn't come here to pressure you, Lieutenant. You've earned the right to choose your own path forward. But I wanted you to know that this base needs what you have to offer, not your combat skills, though those certainly proved useful today. Your experience, your perspective, the ability to look at someone and see what they need to learn. Maya thought about Chen in the chapel, really listening when she explained about control and speed. She thought about Thompson's question, and how he'd asked it genuinely, wanting to understand. Maybe the captain had a point. I'll think about it, sir, she said. That's all I ask. Captain Torres checked his watch. Now I believe you have a performance to give. Commander Hayes and I both plan to attend. I understand you're quite talented. I haven't performed publicly in over a year, sir. I might be rusty. Somehow I doubt that. He offered a slight smile. Good luck, Lieutenant. As they walked back toward the chapel, Maya's mind was spinning. She'd spent the past year trying to figure out who she was now that she wasn't a SEAL. Maybe she'd been asking the wrong question. Maybe it wasn't about becoming someone new. Maybe it was about figuring out how to use who she'd always been in a different context. Inside the chapel, the seats were nearly full. Maya spotted the 5 recruits standing along the back wall, as required by their assignment. They stood at attention, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Good. Discomfort could be a powerful teacher. Mrs. Patterson gathered all the performers for a final briefing. Remember, no matter what happens, just keep going. If you make a mistake, don't stop. The audience won't know unless you show them. You've all practiced, you're all prepared, just trust yourselves. The lights dimmed. The audience settled into their seats. The recital was beginning. The first performer was a young sergeant who played a Chopin waltz on the piano. He was competent but nervous, rushing through some sections, but the audience was warm and supportive. The second act was the vocal performance, a woman with a beautiful soprano voice singing an aria from an Italian opera. Maya found herself getting lost in the music, the nerves settling as she remembered why she loved this. The violin piece was performed by a teenage girl from the local high school, daughter of one of the base administrators. She played a Bach partita with technical precision and surprising emotional depth. The audience was completely silent during her performance, hanging on every note. Then it was Maya's turn. Mrs. Patterson caught her eye and nodded. Maya stood, smoothed her uniform one more time, and walked out onto the small stage area. The audience was just faces in the darkness beyond the lights. She couldn't make out individuals, which helped. She sat at the piano, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. This was the moment. No more thinking, no more worrying. Just music, but then she paused. Something made her look up out at the audience. I was going to play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, third movement, she said. Her voice carried in the quiet chapel. It's a piece I've been practicing for weeks. But I think tonight I'm going to play something different, something I wrote myself. She could feel Mrs. Patterson's surprise from backstage. This wasn't what they'd rehearsed, but Maya knew with sudden certainty that this was what needed to happen. I wrote this piece during my recovery from injuries sustained in the line of duty, she continued. I'm not much of a composer, but this helped me process things I couldn't put into words. It doesn't have a title. I just call it What Remains. She didn't look to see the reactions. She simply began to play. The piece started quietly, almost hesitantly. Single notes, space between them like someone taking careful steps. Then it built, became more confident, the left hand adding depth and rhythm. There was darkness in it, minor chords that spoke of pain and loss. But there was also light, moments of major key brightness that pushed through the shadows. Maya poured everything into it. The fear she'd felt waking up in the hospital, the grief of losing her team, her identity, everything she'd built, the anger at her body for betraying her, the long, slow journey of physical therapy, the depression that had nearly swallowed her whole, but also the moments of grace. The friends who'd stayed, the music that had saved her, the small victories in recovery, the gradual, painful acceptance that life could be different and still be worth living. Her fingers moved across the keys with the same precision she'd once used for entirely different purposes. The same control, the same focus. But instead of combat, instead of survival, it was art. It was expression. It was sharing something true and vulnerable with a room full of strangers. The piece built to a climax, the music becoming urgent, almost frantic. This was the hardest part, the section that had taken her months to get right. Both hands moving independently, complex rhythms layering over each other, the piano singing with all the emotion she'd held back in daily life. Then, gradually, it settled. The chaos resolved into something quieter, something that felt like peace. Not happiness exactly, not a simple happy ending, but acceptance. The music ended on a chord that was neither major nor minor, but something in between. Unresolved but stable, present. Maya's hands lifted from the keys. The chapel was silent. For a moment she panicked, thinking she'd made a terrible mistake. She'd been too raw, too honest. She'd exposed too much. Then the applause started. Not polite performance applause. Real applause. She looked up and saw people on their feet. She saw Commander Hayes wiping her eyes. She saw Captain Torres nodding with something like pride. She saw the 5 recruits in the back, all of them standing, all of them clapping. Thompson had tears running down his face. Maya stood and took a bow, feeling overwhelmed. She hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected people to understand what she'd been trying to say through the music. As she walked off stage, Mrs. Patterson grabbed her hand. "That was incredible," she whispered. "Absolutely incredible." The rest of the recital passed in a blur. Maya watched the other performances from the back room, still processing what had just happened. She'd revealed more in those few minutes of music than she'd revealed to anyone in the past year. And instead of judgment, instead of pity, she'd received understanding. When the recital ended and people began to mingle in the reception area, Maya found herself surrounded. People wanted to thank her, to share how the music had moved them. A veteran with a prosthetic leg told her he'd understood every note. A military spouse said it captured what she'd never been able to explain about watching her husband change after deployment. Chen approached her during a brief lull, holding a cup of punch he'd probably been assigned to serve. "Ma'am, that was... I don't have words for it. Thank you, Chen. I get it now. What you were saying in the chapel earlier, about control and staying calm when everything's moving fast. That's what your music was. All that emotion, all that intensity, but completely controlled." Maya smiled. "That's exactly right." Thompson came over, his friends hanging back nervously. Up close, his eyes were red. "Ma'am, I need to apologize again. Not just for today, but for everything. For every assumption I made. For being so stupid and arrogant." "Apology accepted," Maya said. Then, because he looked like he genuinely wanted to learn, she added, "You know what makes a good soldier? It's not physical strength. It's not being fearless. It's the ability to learn from mistakes, to admit when you're wrong, to grow. You showed some of that today?" "Thank you, ma'am." He hesitated. "Can I ask, what made you enlist? What made you want to become a SEAL?" Maya thought about it. "I wanted to prove I was more than what people assumed. Turns out I was always more. I just needed to figure out what that meant for me." The reception went on for another hour, but Maya found herself needing air. She slipped out a side door and walked to the small garden area where she'd talked with Captain Torres earlier. The night had cooled further, and the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. She'd been standing there for maybe 5 minutes when she heard footsteps. Commander Hayes appeared carrying 2 bottles of water. "Thought you might need this." "Thanks." Maya accepted the water and took a long drink. "It's overwhelming. Good overwhelming or bad overwhelming? I'm not sure yet." Maya sat on a small bench. I didn't plan to play that piece. I don't know what made me change my mind. Commander Hayes sat beside her. I do, you were ready. Maybe not consciously, but some part of you knew it was time to stop hiding behind other people's music and share your own voice. My voice is pretty depressing. Your voice is honest. The commander looked up at the stars. You know, I've known a lot of SEALs in my career. Some of them transition well. They find new purposes, new identities. Others struggle. They get stuck in who they were and can't figure out who they are now. Which category am I in? You've been stuck, Commander Hayes said bluntly. But I think tonight you started to come unstuck. That performance wasn't about showing off your skills or entertaining people. It was about sharing something real. About being vulnerable. That takes more courage than most combat situations. Maya considered that. Those 5 recruits, what's going to happen to them? Officially, they're facing disciplinary action for assault on a superior officer. But Captain Torres and I discussed it. If you're willing to be involved, we'd like to offer them an alternative. What kind of alternative? Mentorship. Specifically, your mentorship. 1 afternoon a week for the next 6 months, you work with them. Teach them what they need to learn. Not just combat skills, but judgment, respect, emotional intelligence. The things that make the difference between a soldier who follows orders and a leader who makes good decisions. Maya was quiet for a long moment. That's a big commitment, it is, and you're under no obligation. But think about it. Those 5 boys learned more from you in 1 day than they've learned from weeks of standard training. Imagine what they could learn in 6 months. What if I'm not ready? What if I don't know how to teach? You taught them today without even trying. In the mess hall, in the chapel, through your music. You're a natural teacher, Maya. You just haven't recognized it yet because you've been too busy mourning what you lost to see what you gained. The words hit harder than Maya expected. She felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back. I'm not the same person I was. Thank God for that, Commander Hayes said firmly. The person you were didn't know how to sit still, didn't know how to share her feelings, didn't know how to teach. The person you are now has all your old strength plus new wisdom. That's more valuable, not less. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the reception winding down inside. Finally, Maya said, I'll do it. The mentorship program. But I need some time to figure out what that looks like. Fair enough, Commander Hayes stood. Take the time you need, but Maya, stop punishing yourself for being human. You got hurt. You survived. You're finding a new path. That's not failure. That's resilience. After the commander left, Maya stayed in the garden a while longer. She thought about the look on Thompson's face when she'd played. About Chen asking questions because he genuinely wanted to learn. About Anderson carefully handling her sheet music earlier. Treating it with respect after what he'd done to it at lunch. People could change. She'd seen it happen countless times in her career. Raw recruits becoming skilled operators. Scared soldiers becoming confident leaders. Why couldn't she believe it was possible for herself? That she could change from who she'd been into someone new without losing everything that mattered? Her phone buzzed. A text from her abuela, Mija, thinking of you. Did the recital go well? Maya smiled. Her grandmother always seemed to know when she needed to hear from her. She typed back, it went better than I expected. I played the piece I wrote. People understood it. The response came quickly. Of course they did. Music speaks truths we can't say with words. I'm proud of you. I love you, abuela. Te amo, mija. Now go rest. Big days take a lot out of us. Maya headed back inside. The reception had mostly cleared out. The 5 recruits were cleaning up, breaking down chairs, picking up discarded programs. They worked efficiently, talking quietly among themselves. When they saw her, they stopped and stood at attention. At ease, Maya said. You guys did good work today. Thank you, ma'am, Thompson said. And thank you for the performance. I've never heard anything like that. None of us have, Miller added. He was one of the quiet ones, hadn't said much during the mess hall incident. It made me think about my brother. He came back from deployment different. I never understood what he was going through. But your music, it kind of explained it. That means a lot, Maya said. Listen, Commander Hayes talked to me about a mentorship program. I'm going to be working with you 5 for the next 6 months. 1 afternoon a week. If you're willing. The 5 of them exchanged glances. What would we be learning? Rodriguez asked. That depends on what you need to learn. But mostly how to be better at this job. How to make good decisions. How to treat people with respect even when you don't understand them. How to be the kind of soldiers this country actually needs. We'd be honored, ma'am. Thompson said, and the others nodded. Good. We start next week. I'll send you the details, Maya paused. And just so we're clear, this isn't punishment. This is an opportunity. What you do with it is up to you. She left them to finish cleaning and walked back to the parking lot. The night air felt good on her face. She felt tired but lighter somehow, like she'd been carrying something heavy and finally set it down. Her car was one of the few left in the lot. As she unlocked it, she saw Captain Torres standing near his own vehicle, talking on his phone. He saw her and raised a hand in greeting. She waved back. The drive home took 20 minutes. Maya lived in a small apartment off base, nothing fancy but clean and quiet. When she got inside, she dropped her keys on the counter and stood in the middle of her living room, not quite sure what to do with herself. For the past year, evenings had been the hardest time. That's when the memories came strongest, when the loneliness felt most acute. But tonight something was different. Tonight she felt tired but not empty, used up but not depleted. She walked to her keyboard, the cheap electronic one she'd had since she was a teenager. It wasn't anything like the Steinway in the chapel, but it was familiar. She sat down and started playing, not the piece from tonight but something new, just messing around, seeing what came out. The melody that emerged was simpler than what she'd played at the recital, quieter. But there was something hopeful in it, something that felt like morning light after a long night. Maya played for an hour, just improvising, letting her fingers find their way. When she finally stopped, she realized she was smiling. Actually smiling, not the polite expression she wore in public, but a genuine feeling of something like joy. Her phone buzzed again. A group text from her old team, the guys she'd served with. Heard you perform tonight. Sorry we couldn't be there. How'd it go? She typed back. It was good. Really good. I think I'm starting to figure things out. The responses came quickly. About time. Proud of you. Tell us more. Video or it didn't happen? Maya laughed. No video, you'll have to trust me. But I might have something to share next time we meet up. Deal. We're holding you to that. She set her phone down and looked around her apartment. It was small and mostly empty. She'd been treating it like a temporary stop, never quite settling in. Maybe it was time to change that. Maybe it was time to accept that this was her life now and that was okay. Over the next few days, word continued to spread about the recital. Maya found herself approached by people she'd never spoken to before. Some wanted to talk about the music. Others wanted to share their own stories of transition and loss. A few wanted to know if she'd be performing again. She started saying yes more often. Yes, she'd consider another recital. Yes, she'd be interested in teaching a music class. Yes, she'd be willing to speak at the veteran support group about finding purpose after service. The mentorship program with the 5 recruits started the following week. They met in a small training room on a Wednesday afternoon. Maya had spent days planning what to say, what to teach, but when they all sat down together, she threw out her notes. Tell me about yourselves, she said. Not your stats or your qualifications. Tell me why you're really here, why you joined, what you're hoping to become. They went around the circle. Thompson wanted to prove himself to his father, a retired Marine who'd never thought he'd amount to anything. Chen was trying to honor his father's legacy. Anderson wanted to find discipline he'd never had growing up. Miller wanted to protect people, the